FirstNet. We appreciate the hard work that you've done. Being here with us in Nashville is greatly appreciated. And again, we appreciate and thank you for your support for rural America and small carriers that serve rural America. So thank you, TJ. Hope some of you got an opportunity to spend some time with him. He, as you can tell, he's not only passionate, but if there's anybody who can pull this off, I have to give TJ credit for that. Yeah, he's going to make it happen. All right, now let's hear from our next panel. We'll hear from a state of the art of the industry report from the industry's leading innovators. And joining us, and if you'll just come on up as I call your name, Craig Sparks from Spire, and then Tamara Casey from Ligado Networks, Glenn Laxdal of Ericsson, and Patrick Kaiser of Huawei. And there's Glenn, very good. And here to lead the conversation with this exceptional panel is Jason Marcheck. And Jason serves as Research Director for Current Analysis. In his position, Jason and his analyst team examine and evaluate activities in fixed and mobile markets throughout the United States and the world for that matter. And they monitor overall coverage of the mobile ecosystem. And now, to get the discussion started, I'll turn it over to Jason. Welcome, Jason.
Very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Let me get this out of your way.
All right. Well, thank you, and welcome. I think that we're roundly blessed with a plethora of topics that we can talk about today, and a great panel to talk about them. You know, we talked about a little bit earlier this morning about spectrum auctions and what's going on there. We talked a little bit this morning about doubling down, or IoT, and how really that might, you know, double down on the way that the telecommunications network already is starting to serve as kind of the intersection between industry and society. We have the ability to talk about mobile networks and, you know, how they are evolving and densifying and transforming to meet all the needs of the customers that you serve. And then we have the opportunity to talk about virtualization. You know, how the ability to move from dedicated hardware to off-the-shelf hardware to create additional flexibility and scalability in the networks, and how that's going to help you not only improve your cost structure, but also to better serve your customers. And I think really, if there's a challenge in all this, it might be to, you know, how do we boil all of that down in the 45 minutes that we have together. And so, you know, at Current Analysis, we like to do some research. And so one of the things that I'm going to do right now is present a couple data points that hopefully will give us some, you know, some insights into, you know, how carriers are thinking about key technologies, whether it be, you know, evolving their networks from LTE today or to 4.5G into, you know, to 5G a few years down the road, or virtualization. And so one of the questions we asked carriers in one of the surveys that we did was, you know, what are you planning on if you're thinking about migrating your networks from LTE today to 4.5G and beyond? What are some of the key things that you need to implement in your networks in the near term? And so you can see the top 5 bars there really start to center around, you know, capacity and density in the network, both the RAN and the core, and as also flexibility in both, you know, the RAN and the core in terms of taking care of virtual or instituting virtualization. So that's, you know, I think there's no question that those topics are on the minds of most everyone in the industry today. And then, you know, sort of if we think about those, there are 3 of those top 5 bars there being really about virtualization. Then we asked, you know, so what are some of the functions that you guys are thinking about virtualizing, you know, in the near term? And you can see that things around the mobile core and the ability to support video were, you know, 3 of the major priorities, I guess. And so if we think about scalability and density of the network, if we think about flexibility in the network but via virtualization, you know, there's a lot that we can do to transform networks. So I think what we really want to try to structure the discussion today is, number 1, network transformation. What are some of the things that you guys can do in the near term, not 5 years from now, but maybe in the next 12, 18 or so months to start the ball rolling? And then not just to have a discussion about technology for technology's sake, but how does this really enable you to support new services, to offer new services, and enhance your customer's experience. And then finally, how do we make money off of all this? This is all interesting technology, and it's a lot of fun to talk about, and we have a lot of great panelists up here to do that. But this isn't our hobby for the most part, and so how do we actually make money off this? And so I think with that, what I'm going to do is just go have a seat over here and start the discussion. And I think that one of the data points up here really points to RAN evolution. Okay, and so maybe this is a question for everybody to weigh in on, as you see fit. But how are you looking at, if we're talking about evolutions in the radio network, or what are we seeing as the really important steps that need to be taken in the next, or can be taken, I guess, in the next 12, 18 or so months to start making progress on, evolving from LTE to 4.5G to 5G, and kind of paving the way for those things that are going to happen to support things like IoT and massive mobile broadband connectivity and video services and all of the things that we can see coming down the road. So maybe Glenn, let's start with you.
Well, I think good to be here. Good morning, everybody. So I think what we would say is not only is the bow wave of data across the networks here, but it's going to continue to be here for the next 5 to 10 years. If you think about the rate of growth of data traffic across our mobile networks today, across North America, data is continuing to grow maybe 50 to 60% year over year. I think you're seeing that, and maybe even more than that in your networks. And if you just take this out for the next 5 years, that's about an 8 times growth in total data traffic across your networks. If you take that out for 10 years, that's a 50 to a 60 times rate of growth in data traffic. And our revenue isn't growing by 8 times, and our revenue isn't growing by 50 to 60 times. Our revenues across the industry are basically flattening, which means that we've got to get more and more innovative to continue to drive profitability from that relatively flat rate of revenue growth. There's some new areas that we can grow into that we'll talk about later in the panel in terms of revenue growth, but in terms of maximizing the efficiency of the RAN, I think it's you're in the process now of deploying your LTE networks. We're now maybe 5 years in to the deployment of the LTE networks. The next step is going to be adding the second carrier, which some of you are in the process of doing right now. Eventually, the third carrier, and then it's going to be carrier aggregation across those 3 carriers to increase the efficiency and the density of those networks. Eventually, then, beyond that, it's going to be more and more small cells. Today, it's mostly macro cells, but tomorrow it's going to be more and more small cells. Consolidating the baseband, remoting the radio heads, and then eventually deploying small cells to get at the hotspot coverage that is hard to get to with macros. And all of that will set us up for the continued evolution in the RAN, combined cell to be able to talk, for the mobile device to be talking to 2 cells at one time. All of those are software techniques that we're going to be able to introduce into the RAN to make the RAN more and more efficient. And then on the core side, there's going to be a tighter and tighter integration between the core and the RAN. And as we ultimately get to 5G, we think about those two being completely integrated. And the way we do that is through increasing virtualization of the core. It doesn't have to happen overnight. It's going to happen over a long period of time, but it will happen. Virtualization of the core networking resources, and then the integration of that all IP core with the IP network in the RAN. And that sort of completes the evolution and sets us up for the migration to 5G. And it's all about getting more and more efficient at dealing with the tremendous capacity growth across our networks, because I think the good thing is the demand for what we are providing seems to be pretty insatiable.
Yeah, so that was a comprehensive answer. Patrick, I know Huawei has thoughts on 4.5G especially, so is there anything in particular that you guys are thinking about and advising your customers on, especially with respect to paving the way to, 2020 is not that far off, but we do have to take some steps in the interim. And are there any, how are you guys talking to your customers about things like that?
Great, thanks for
asking, Jason. Appreciate it. It's great to be here. So the way we're viewing 4.5G is it's an evolution, while 5G is a revolution. I think it's critical to understand that. 4.5G is going to have all kinds of exceptional technologies that are being introduced, and I can go into a couple of those. But the key focus here is spectrum. I think, as Steve mentioned earlier in his speech, it's critical that we try to utilize this spectrum as much as possible. There definitely is a limited amount. As you go on higher bands for 5G, people are talking about 28 gig. That's not a line of sight, or that's a not a non-line of sight type frequency. So it's going to focus more on small cells. So it's critical that the sub-6 gigahertz spectrum improves the spectral efficiency. The technologies that are being introduced will focus around improving spectral efficiency. So this is how the operators can improve their bottom line. Of course, introducing new services is the way to improve the top line. But some of the technologies that we're looking at for 4.5G, massive MIMO, we're already in the process of introducing a 64T, 64R type integrated antenna that's within the size constraints, given particular frequencies on the TDD bands that will allow you to increase the spectral efficiency by fourfold. Other technologies that we're introducing, as Glenn brought up, Cloud RAN. This is a great solution to control the interference between sites, particularly on small cells where they get closer and closer together. The interference is going to become more significant, so you want to have a centralized baseband processing capability to control that interference. So you're looking at improving cell edge there. And then other aspects like MSA and LAA, multi-service aggregation, trying to aggregate up to 4 and 5 cell component carrier cells. A lot of folks will say, I don't have that spectrum, but if you look at the unlicensed spectrum, particularly for small cells, where you need that capacity, that's going to give you the capability of providing that higher throughput without actually having to buy new spectrum. You simply use the unlicensed spectrum. So we're looking at, we're coining the phrase gigaworld in our product line, but trying to deliver solutions that get you to the 1 gig mark. 4G was targeted at the 100 megabits per second. 4.5G is targeting the 1 gig. 5G eventually will be targeting, the 10 gig mark. So these are the different types of solutions that we think make sense to focus on with respect to improving the top line as well as the bottom line.
Gotcha, very good. And so from the carrier perspective, I'm definitely interested in hearing, what you have to say about all this. And there was a lot of, it's an all hands on deck approach, I think, going on forward with respect to the technologies that are available. But a couple things that, Stephen and Patrick brought up with respect to spectrum and IoT. Tamara, I think that's something that, Ligado thinks a lot about IoT, so I think that maybe you might be able to weigh on that. But Craig and Tamara, this is for you as well if you want. But the carrier perspective on what these guys just talked about. There's obviously a lot of technology, a lot of it's being introduced and refined and available to you. How are you guys thinking about what you need to do over the next 12, 18 or so months to kind of start putting the building blocks in place for where you need to be by 2020?
Well, I appreciate it, and thanks. Glad to be here. I wanted to reiterate some of the comments on spectral efficiency and specifically, the key to making the use of that spectrum. But from a carrier's perspective, a lot of our answers are dependent upon our particular spectrum holdings. And then to reiterate some of the comments from yesterday, whether you're, from Spire's perspective, building on a hybrid fiber wireless network. If that's a strength for your carrier or a weakness, I think your answers are going to be dependent. And so there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to a lot of this for carriers and what they're after. But in Spire's perspective, building upon that strength, there's a lot of technologies in the using the Huawei 4.5G. Mobile World Congress was full of that. I certainly enjoyed the message there. But on the way to 5G, which we have to, everybody in the room knows that actually the 3GPP just started in Korea officially, other than the pre-talks this week. So there's a lot of work to get done over the next 2 years. But in terms of the technologies on the table for consideration for 5G, there's a lot of different approaches from, you had asked about in terms of how you'd actually support IoT. Deployments and strategies for the architecture for your network and when and how quickly you would centralize are based on whether you have front haul fiber capability or back haul, whether you're at on your And so in our case, on C-Spire's perspective, we want to take advantage of our hybrid fiber and wireless approach to go aggressively with those technologies that take advantage of that.
Gotcha, absolutely. Tamara, any thoughts?
Thank you. The way we approach this is slightly differently. Our heritage is as a mobile satellite operator, and so from our perspective, everything starts with that service offering first and foremost, and then as has been alluded to, a hybrid approach, given that satellite heritage, is really what we're focused on. So how do we look at the kinds of terrestrial augmentation and the kinds of technologies that have been mentioned, working in concert with our satellite in order to meet some of the pervasive coverage requirements associated with IoT, as well as, frankly, even additional technologies beyond the ones that have been mentioned in terms of how we can do augmentation on our satellite capabilities, how we blend that with our terrestrial capabilities, and really find that right balance. So for us, it's frankly more about the pervasive connectivity, ultra-reliable connectivity. Capacity is certainly important, and any type of RAN technology that improves capacity is incredibly valuable to us, as we are, pursuing a limited amount of spectrum from a terrestrial perspective. So it's really finding those right balances, and things like cloud RAN, repeating technologies, improvements in the satellite capabilities. All of those have to be blended together in our sense. So like C-Spire, I think we have a slightly different approach on the problem, and it's really finding, almost cherry picking, if you will, those bright spots in the technology development arena, and saying how we can apply those to our unique situation to optimize coverage first and foremost, capacity, throughput, et cetera.
Gotcha. Are there, and for the carrier, are there specific technology advances that you're really kind of counting on over the next couple years to kind of help you take advantage of the various strategies that you're obviously pursuing based on where you're coming from and what your business model is?
Certainly. So following on the one-size-doesn't-fit-all strategy, as Stephen Byer, CTO, spoke yesterday in the panel session, we're uniquely advantaged in our market of Mississippi with 28 gigahertz holdings that are on the table for inclusion in 5G, and specifically working with partners in terms of making the most efficient use of that spectrum to augment the fiber to the home. And so our small cell approach and things we're going to be doing with that are, we're uniquely interested or highly interested in the modulation technologies in terms of maximizing non-line of sight, even if it's over short distances. For, you've got fiber to the home, fiber to the curb, fiber to the pole. We can come back anywhere in that architecture and go forward and say, where will those technologies allow us to drop off and make the most use of that spectrum to augment the services we're already providing.
Okay.
And for us, I would say our focus is really more on the 4.5G aspect. Our holdings are mid-band spectrum, obviously, and finding that balance and synergy between the satellite offering and the terrestrial augmentation offering currently has us more focused on 4.5 type of innovations than 5G right now. Obviously, we're very mindful of everything that's going on in 5G and paying very close attention to that. But we actually think the satellite hybrid terrestrial network with focus on 4.5G types of technologies puts us in a unique position to very quickly be able to address a lot of the IoT use cases that are articulated in 5G, but that we think in terms of whether they're in remote coverage areas or sort of mission critical type systems, autonomous systems. We believe that those areas lend themselves to less focus on broadband connectivity and more focus on ultra-reliable, ultra-efficient connectivity, pervasiveness of that connectivity. We are also looking, though, as part of that 4.5G set of innovations and innovations that are frankly kind of independent of the RAN standards, pervasive security. Security is a much talked about but not yet much implemented issue, particularly in the Internet of Important Things, as we like to talk about it. And so innovations in security, innovations in virtualization, innovations that are probably more in the 4.5G realm in terms of terrestrial RAN, and then significant innovations in our satellite capabilities as well. We have all brand new products coming out there that are much more cost effective, much more efficient. So we're fortunate in that a lot of the unique capabilities of our satellite, we have the ability to control those on the ground. And so that gives us a lot of capability to continue to enhance that aspect of the network from an efficiency standpoint as well.
Great, outstanding. So one of the things you mentioned that I want to kind of use as a jumping off point is innovations in virtualization. And that's something that's obviously been a big topic. The vendors on stage have talked a lot about it over the past couple years. It's starting to, the larger carriers are starting to make some noise about it and take some steps. From your perspective, how do the next 12 to 18 months look in terms of, and I know, the overriding point being carriers are starting from different places, there are different requirements, there's a myriad of things that will go into how an operator, any individual operator looks at virtualization, how they take advantage of it. Are there particular things that you guys are looking at in terms of virtualizing the core or just individual functions or where you might start to be able to take advantage of these things to support IoT or just to support greater service flexibility for the services you offer now?
Well, I want to take the chance to actually reiterate the security points that were previously mentioned. And with respect to, if we all had a crystal ball and you can look ahead to the middle of the 2020s and 5G, obviously it's part and parcel, right? We all know we're there. It's just the baby steps along the way and the pieces like you were mentioning. But one of the advantages of that architecture, and I want to put it, is we as carriers are really remiss in our duty if we don't make security just the basis. It has to be the foundation for all of these network architectures and anything and any of these technologies and virtualization that bring that. If they don't allow you to just nimbly bring in policy-based security approaches to classes of devices, classes of services, classes of customers, a meter, a meter that's supposed to wake up once a month and pop out 64 bytes if it's subtly phoning home continuously. I mean, there's entire, to somewhere in Yugoslavia or something like that. There's just nothing acceptable, from a carrier's perspective that we didn't architect in from the very beginning with these tools to make that type of activity impossible. It should be the foundation for the approach going forward. Guys, if you want to build on that.
Yeah, I think that we're in sort of a unique position relative to our terrestrial network in terms of being a greenfield opportunity for the deployment. So given that aspect, we're certainly maniacally focused on virtualization for the core infrastructure there and looking at how we can extend that out as far as possible. But as I mentioned, we're not resting on the laurels on our satellite infrastructure either. We have programs underway now looking at how we can bring more of the concepts of terrestrial core network virtualization into a satellite core network virtualization as well, and be able to provide tighter integration and consistency of services across the two types of radio access networks. Security, I can't emphasize it enough. I mean, for us, our four key differentiators that we really focus on as we look at this, IoT, but with an eye towards these mission-critical and autonomous systems and applications, pervasive satellite connectivity, pervasive security at every layer of the architecture, as was mentioned. That has to start at the devices and be consistent and coherent all the way through the network to, I like to talk about it one step short of three-letter agencies that are things like DoD levels of security.
Right.
And peer-to-peer is another often sort of overlooked capability, I think that we are also significantly focused on. And finally, precision location. You know, we have spent a lot of years now making sure that we're getting things right with the GPS community, and I think we are on a much better path and a much better place than we've been historically with that. But we're looking at taking that a step further and saying not just how do we coexist and share spectrum effectively, but how can we go beyond that, and how can we improve the reliability, how can we improve the accuracy. Many of these autonomous or mission critical types of systems require much, much greater accuracy in GPS capability. So we are evaluating things like what we can do in terms of a terrestrial augmentation of GPS and different types of GPS receivers implemented in our devices that will you know, take accuracy from meters to centimeters. Gotcha. So those for us are sort of the 4 key areas. And so for us, it's a balancing act in terms of when we look at RAN technologies and virtualization technologies of how do we meld these successfully, and how do we, you know, pick the optimal target solutions to enable that differentiated hybrid network approach and architecture.
Very good. So from the vendor perspective, I know, you know, Glenn Ericsson and Patrick Huawei both have pretty high profile, you know, projects ongoing with helping carriers and some of them in the US, some of them around the world, take the first steps. For this audience, you know, if you don't have a massive budget or you don't have the opportunity to undertake, you know, painstaking, you know, organizational transformation and retraining and really, how do, you know, if you're not the largest of the large carriers, how are you guys talking to your customers about, you know, how to move forward over the next, you know, year or so?
Well, I think what's important to keep in mind is that we're at least with respect to the core, like we were with respect to the transition to 4G in the RAN 5 years ago. We're at the beginning of a long cycle of innovation in the core that is all about enabling the core to be much more software enabled, where the infrastructure that the network functions will run on will be increasingly virtualized, and the network resources will be increasingly programmable and software defined. We're at the beginning of that cycle. We're not in the middle of that cycle. Even the biggest carriers are at the very beginning of that transition. So just as the biggest carriers were launching LTE in 2010 and 2011, and some of the rural carriers are now in the midst of the launch of LTE, similarly the network function virtualization trend and the trend toward increasingly software-defined cores is going to be a long wave. It's going to be a 10-year cycle. And we're at the very beginning of that cycle. And so as you move forward, be aware of how you can take advantage of those technologies, because the ecosystem will gravitate toward that increasingly programmable core. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. As we move from, you know, the smartphone, as we move from smartphones driving all of our revenue to increasingly IoT-type applications driving the revenue growth. We're near the saturation point in smartphones. 85% of the US population has smartphones today. So there's not going to be a lot of growth left in that domain. But 2 things will happen. On the smartphone side, people will increasingly be using those smartphones and tablets to be consuming media content. So we've got to find a way to efficiently deliver that media to smartphones. And then the growth going forward is increasingly going to be coming from IoT devices, not $50 per month ARPUs, but maybe $2 to $3 per month ARPUs. You got to be able to deliver that connection in a really, really low-cost way. So 2 applications are going to be virtualized. The first in the core networks are CDNs, content delivery networks, will be virtualized so that we can be caching video at the edge of the network. For you, that means caching video, let's say, in your central offices or even at your eNode Bs. And that reduces the cost of delivering that video, makes it much more efficient to deliver that video, and caters to your subscriber base that wants to be consuming the video on their smartphones. On the IoT side, it means, let's say, standing up a virtualized mobile packet core, the point where I can be assigning the IP addresses to these machines that are driving $1, $2, $3 per month ARPU. If I virtualize the mobile packet core, I can stand that instance of that application up in my central office And I don't have to spend a lot of money moving a hardened piece of hardware, like a network appliance, into my data center, into my central office, which would take months to set up and test and so on. I can stand that virtual instance of the mobile packet core up instantaneously, enabling that IoT application, whatever it might be, a connected wind turbine, a connected oil pump, whatever the application might be. So virtualizing the mobile packet core, virtualizing the CDN are two examples where we can take advantage of virtualizing network resources today, and it's going to continue. We're at the very beginning of a long wave of technical innovation.
Patrick, I want to talk a little bit about services, but I would definitely want to give you a chance to sort of round out the discussion of virtualization, if you have anything to say, or we can.
So from a perspective of network virtualization, I think most has been said to this point, but as Glenn said, it's going to start at the core. It's going to be a slow-moving process. Eventually, you're going to get to the RAN component as well, too. The objective, I think, longer term is to be able to slice the network. And this is longer term 5G, but I do want to quickly touch on that because I think virtualization will be a critical component for 5G. So we're really pushing hard on the concept of an end-to-end slicing as opposed to just focusing on the core. We think longer term, it's by far and away in the operator's interest to make sure that you're not only just slicing off software components and software services and hardware in the core, but also in the RAN as well, too. And it's critical, for example, for an end-to-end type application. The narrowband IoT that has recently been introduced is a very, very small 180 kilohertz type channel. There's no way you want to allocate an entire 20 megahertz LTE channel to that application and waste your spectrum, waste your hardware resources in the RAN, and so on and so forth. So looking at an end-to-end type virtualized network where you're slicing the network from a service perspective is, I think, one of the key critical components moving forward, and looking at how do we, so with all these massive applications, advanced MBB as well as machine-to-machine, how do you actually best utilize the network without waste? So virtualization is a key component of that.
Very good. Thanks so much. And so, we've talked a lot about technology, and this is good because it's the CTO panel. Let's move on to services a little bit. And what are some of the, service innovations that we can expect to see, over the next year, couple years, from the service provider's perspective? How are you using all this stuff to offer innovative services? And what are some of those that you're looking forward to?
Well, and I actually like to take this chance to segue from the network slicing view and say, as we talked about that the crystal ball was 10 years, it's part and parcel, but we're at the beginning of that 10-year cycle. But I would like to say, as a vision, we as CCA members have a unique interest in making sure at the end of that 10-year cycle that some of the services we can sell on in terms of virtualized slices, if you look at the future of whatever becomes of 600, whatever becomes of the services behind IoT, we, instead of looking at traditional LTE roaming like we have thought, we need to be looking at these sub $9 modules that only have one or two low bands. Maybe they have 600 in a US North American centric view. Maybe they have 600 in one other band or something like that. And then in kind of a least cost routing model, we have a future where these slices are available to us. And we've from all the tools that we have in our tool bag to make sure we have access to that as a slice where I could sell IoT devices within my own network, but that if I'm mainly those pallets or shipping pallets spend 90% of their time in my market, I have to have a service that they can go anywhere in the United States and find their way around, and I should be almost like a Google Fi model. I should be abstracted from not even knowing or caring whose network they're on. Yeah. Those are the kind of things that we have to take that roadmap and take that from a CCA perspective, and we can't be disadvantaged on the national stage for those types of services going forward. So we should make sure that's on the roadmap.
Very good. Tamara, I guess sticking with the IoT theme, there's a lot of, the stuff in the press is about driverless cars and e-health and not having to go to the doctor, and I guess there's a rural application there. But what are some of the key IoT services that are if there is low-hanging fruit, what are you looking at as far as what operators can be delivering to their customers in rural areas to start taking advantage of this, to start taking advantage of these things, in the near term to sort of build towards that long-term vision?
Yeah, I think part of the challenge with IoT, and we all face this, is sort of how do you stratify it? How do you chop up this massive thing, right? So you have low power types of systems, you have narrowband types of systems, you have broadband types of systems, et cetera. And the way we look at this, again, we kind of come at this through the lens of our existing satellite business, which is focused on providing communications, both voice and data, to primarily a very remote set of applications and service requirements. And so for us, really taking that experience that we have from our existing customer base, which is in a vast array of public safety applications, transportation applications, oil and gas exploration broadly, construction, mining, those types of things. So we're really starting with what we know, and trying to build on what do we do to augment that. And so for us, it's, I kind of, talked about it as whether it's the Internet of critical or important or, autonomous things. But autonomous is one that's very interesting to us. We have a lot of focus internally on autonomous right now, which is one of the things driving our view of looking at a GPS augmentation capability as well. When you think about commercial beyond line of sight drone applications, for example, a huge area, we think satellite is a key enabler in that space. And interestingly, every one of the verticals that we serve today in these critical, IoT and comm spaces has a pent-up need for commercial beyond line of sight UAS, whether that's in a piece of equipment itself, whether that's in a transportation vehicle that's terrestrially based, or whether that's an actual drone type of application. And so whether that's rail, maritime, mining, et cetera, there's this massive pent-up need. And when you look at who's getting exceptions to the FAA waivers today to do commercial drone applications, it's a lot of people in these verticals. And so we are taking that requirement very seriously, and we're very maniacally focused on that. We think it's sort of the hardest use case, frankly, and if we get that one right, we think there's significant applicability to automotive. We're not going to be able to compete in the massive throughput to the vehicle, but in terms of ultra secure, ultra reliable, sort of mission critical system type of monitoring of any type of autonomous vehicle, farming equipment, construction equipment, consumer vehicles, commercial transportation vehicles, pervasive coverage, you have to start there. Sure. And so those are the types of applications that we're focused on. I talk about mission critical and autonomous a lot, and that's really where our focus is, because it's pervasiveness of that connectivity, security of that connectivity, reliability, et cetera, are the things that are critical there when you're talking about command and control capabilities, monitoring of critical systems, critical performance measures, and being able to do things like over-the-air software upgrades, those types of things. So those are we've tried to narrow the field of view very significantly, and we're coming at it from a place of knowing what our existing customers want and what do we need to do to augment those capabilities in order to bring these new tools and technologies into their workforce, whether it's to improve life safety or decreasing operations or insurance losses or those types of things.
Gotcha.
Let me just jump off on that, because there's some great points there. And I think that when we think about the Internet of Things, some of the best opportunities are actually in the rural areas. And one of the things that we as an industry are really, really good at is the connectivity layer of the Internet of Things, connecting the devices, monitoring the devices, capturing data off the devices, because all of that happens over a network. And the more remote the area, the more value in the connectivity to that machine or that device. Tamara talked about the oil industry. She talked about the mining industry, the remote control of machines that are that are providing value in that industry. And so it's our job to provide the connectivity to those machines, the ability to remotely control those machines or capture data off of those machines. And that connectivity layer has a lot of value. And as I say, the more remote the region, the higher the value of the connectivity layer. So I think that's the lowest hanging fruit of IoT, is providing the connectivity to these machines before we even do anything else. It's just getting connectivity to those hard to get at areas, whether it's an oil field, an oil pump, a machine that's operating underground in a mine, a wind turbine, what have you. I think there's value in providing connectivity to those devices, those machines.
Absolutely. And so narrowband IoT was mentioned a couple times or alluded to, and I know Ericsson and Huawei are both pretty big on that. So Patrick, do you want to just kind of, we have a few minutes left and I want to start talking about monetization models perhaps, but just a few thoughts to kind of round us out.
Sure. So with respect to narrowband IoT, quite frankly, I think it's an exciting time because there's a lot of challenges with respect to machine-to-machine, most of them monetary challenges. The cost of the devices, some of the initial LTE devices that were introduced, the wired-band, were hitting around $75. And as you mentioned earlier, that we're targeting somewhere around $5 to $10, $7 per module. So that in itself is going to be a big help, especially in the consumer market. If you want to hit that $30 million target, the 30 billion connections that 4.5G is targeting and the 100 billion that 5G is targeting, you've got to get these price targets down. So the one that I find more critical is that truck roll expense. If I want to go ahead and deploy something to a Coke machine, it's going to cost $250 to $500 for the technician to go out there and install it. If you have the way to overcome that is to have a 10-year battery life on these devices. So instead of replacing them every 1 to 2 years and spending that OpEx of $250 to $500 every 2 or 3 years, you're looking at spending it once every 10 years. So amortized over time, that $250 becomes a much, much smaller number. So there's a lot of exciting things that I think are happening with respect to the practical aspects of machine-to-machine in the next couple of years that are going to seed the market for even greater deployments. The trick is to get as many devices out there as possible. It's quantity, not high ARPU. These ARPUs, you're looking at $2 to $4 per month. So, compared to an average of $54 or $53 for someone, for a user using MBB. So there's a lot of exciting things going on right now, I think, that are going to make this the era, the next couple of years, really sort of the seeding point for a fairly rapid growth in machine-to-machine. And narrowband IoT, I think, is going to be critical.
Very good. So we have about 4 minutes left, and you guys have segued nicely for me into the last thing I wanted to talk about was making money off all this stuff. And so maybe just closing statements, a minute each. We'll start at the back and go this way. There's a lot. We've talked about a lot. There's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of things that you could tackle. What are the near-term money-making opportunities that these type of all the stuff we talked about enable, and how can operators start taking advantage of that to kind of raise their top line?
Sure. So I think any businessman's going to look at the top line and bottom line. So top line, you want to introduce new services or enhance your existing services. So and then looking at the bottom line, how do I reuse as much equipment as possible? So from the virtualization perspective, a virtualized IMS or a virtualized core, I know there's slow uptake on the virtualized IMS in the rural markets, waiting for some of the tier ones to go ahead and partner and drive that, but eventually it's going to happen. And a great opportunity there to capitalize on virtualization is to partner with other folks, using a hosted IMS, for example. So you're increasing your rich communication services, your top line revenue, and at the same time you're managing your bottom line. Narrowband IoT, some of the early deployment opportunities there, I think that really will introduce opportunities for the rural operators, tracking devices, tracking animals, children, equipment, all kinds of things. Smart parking, smart meters, all these things will have near-term applications that I think make a lot of sense. Controlling that bottom line while at the same time increasing new services. And one last one, I think there's huge opportunities with massive MIMO and massive carrier aggregation to introduce fixed broadband to the home. We believe that you're looking at an era where you could compete against DSL speeds and fiber speeds by offering 10 to 50 megabits to the home type services. So there's plenty of opportunities, I think, moving forward to enhance existing services and introduce even new services.
Gotcha.
And control the bottom line at the same time.
Glenn?
I'll mention three. Video is growth area number one. People are increasingly consuming their video on mobile devices. We need to efficiently get that video to the mobile devices, and then there's a lot of demand for it, so let's figure out how to monetize it. The second area of growth is in the area of IoT that we've talked about. It's getting a connectivity layer in place first to all those devices that need to be connected. The more rural the area, the higher the value to the connectivity. And there's lots of technologies that we can provide you that enable you to get that really efficient connectivity. And then the third area is broadband. We can now use, we've got the technology to use wireless in the last 500 meters or in the last kilometer or in the last couple of miles to provide broadband connectivity to the home, to the village, to the town, to the suburban community. And so broadband is, we're going through a wave of broadband demand right now. It's increasing pretty dramatically, and we now have more and more efficient ways of delivering broadband to the home or to the enterprise. And so those are three pretty good growth opportunities, I think.
Very good. Tamara, what do you think?
So for us, again, autonomous and mission critical, to the point made about not everybody can be everything to all people. Yeah. I think you got to pick your sweet spots. You got to really understand your market and where you bring a unique and differentiated value proposition to the market. So for us, that's the ultra reliable aspect of the 5G use cases, and looking at a hybrid set of technologies to deliver on those as quickly as possible. But also the point about the bottom line is critically important. And so for us, we have a massive investment in our existing satellite infrastructure. Obviously, we want to capitalize on that as much as possible, but from a terrestrial perspective, it's a greenfield opportunity, and that greenfield opportunity means more implementation of virtualization and network slicing much earlier, which we believe gives us a lot more flexibility in the service offering, as well as dramatically different cost structure and total cost of ownership relative to the deployment of the network.
Great. Greg, take us home.
I'll just touch on the points real quickly. We have what's unique to Spire is we just have an insatiable desire to pull fiber. We have a high customer demand that we can't meet. Wireless local loops, not a new problem, but we're faced to go on the video portion of the next 10 years of that traffic. We as carriers have to do everything we can with technology to make the best spectral efficiency, and bits per hertz per square kilometer for our networks. It's not just about the spectral efficiency, and making sure we're exploring every technology we can to shunt those type of services to ground, to fiber or cable in the ground, and make sure those are seamless, and that we use the precious resource of licensed spectrum as almost as a last resort, but when we do use it, to use it well to provide those services in a compelling manner for those customers. And then lastly, I wanted to say that we said there's not the Internet of Things, machine type communications. They're not one solution fits all, and that we have to understand that those are different. Some of those devices may have a very high burst need. They may need to wake up and get something out very quickly and go to sleep for a long time, and others may just want to trickle something out every second. They're different, and that when we look at that entire span of machine type communications, that we as carriers are cognizant to put in, I started off with these comments, a security level, that we partner with the right people in the industry and bring in the expertise into our companies if we don't have them, to make security a foundation across the board for all of those slices of customers, and that we have security solutions that meet the needs of those different types. From dog collars are going to have a different security model than DoD type applications, but that we're prepared as carriers to address those needs and make the future of all of this secure for everyone.
Very good. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks to the panel. I think we could probably talk all morning, but we're out of time, so thank you, guys. All right. Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you to the distinguished panel. It was not only interesting, but quite enlightening. Not only do we hear about the new technology, how we're going to deploy it, but also how you're going to make some profit off of it. So all good things. Thanks. Okay, now